Hello, welcome to week 5. We've just finished a couple of weeks on the personal essay, and we're going to start a couple of weeks on narrative structure. I'll be talking about narrative structure in just a minute, but I wanted to remind you that I pushed the due date for the personal essay back to September 27th, so that's going to give us some more time. You should know what a personal essay is by now. If you need some help generating a topic, send me an email, but go ahead and get started on it. One of the things I'm going to do this week, later in the week, is set up some groups so that you can get some peer feedback. And I'm going to also try and set up an online, 1 or 2 sessions of online office hours so you can ask questions about personal essay or about the course in general. So I'll send you an email later in the week once I get those set up. Let me just briefly say how I approach narrative structure with creative nonfiction. One of the things I do is I contrast memoir with autobiography. And if you have read many autobiographies, one of the things you realize is they're pretty much in chronological order. They'll start maybe with some of the person's ancestors or early years, the birth, childhood, education, difficulties, schooling, going off to college, building a career, getting married, having a family, those sorts of things. So there are fairly set pattern of events that unfold with an autobiography, and they tend to unfold in chronological order. A memoir and I would say other forms of nonfiction as well. One of the things that they're going to do, no matter whether it's a personal essay, memoir, or whatever, is play around with chronological order. And I would say that whenever you find that you're in strict chronological order and you're doing creative nonfiction and not an autobiography, and I don't think any of us are famous enough to do an autobiography, you should be aware that maybe you're in trouble. So if you're too close to autobiography, you're probably in trouble. You need to rethink what you're doing. So we're going to start this week with a few ways of breaking with chronological order, because I think the narrative structure becomes interesting once you start breaking with chronological order. So 2 of the things that we'll be reading, one is a portion of Joella Frazier's memoir, which is titled Territory of Men. And she does some interesting things with what I call narrative speed. You have heard, I'm sure, the adage, show don't tell. It's kind of a staple of a lot of creative writing programs. I'm personally not that crazy about that particular adage. I think everything is telling ultimately, because you've got your narrative voice, and if that narrative voice is not there, then whatever story you're trying to tell is not going to work very well. So what I like to talk about instead of show don't tell, which I think kind of gets at the same kind of idea, is narrative speed. So here's the basics of narrative speed. There are going to be times in your narrative where something that maybe happened in a 20-second time frame will be covered over 5 or 6 pages. So you'll be slowing down speed in those situations. You'll also be basically creating a scene, because if you're going that slow, you're creating a scene. But there are going to also be other times where you need to cover a lot of ground. And so what you might be doing is covering something that happened or in 9 months or over a 9-month period or several years. And you'll cover it in a paragraph or two. There, the speed is going very fast, and I think you'll find if you start watching the narrative structure of what you're reading, that a good author is going to shift speeds a lot. It just makes the narrative more interesting. And if you're not shifting speed, you're just getting kind of slogged down with a lot of things that are not important. So whenever you're doing a narrative, think about, where do I need to slow down? Where do I need to speed up? I think Frasier is particularly good at this. And there's one thing that I think if you pay attention that you'll notice that she's doing, which is pretty interesting and also breaks some of the basic rules that we've been taught. The other thing that we'll look at is a section of Jill Chrisman's memoir, which is called Dark Room. She talks in the section that you'll be reading about an event that happened in her family that was a pretty pivotal, foundational kind of event in her family, where her father was bathing her brother when he was a baby, and the water was too hot, and he didn't realize it, and the baby got scalded and fairly severely burned. What you're going to find Chrisman doing is looping. She'll go through that basic event several times in the short passage that you're given, and each time it's a little different. So looping is another interesting way to start playing around with strict chronological order, or a single kind of rate or time to your narrative. So those are two things that we'll be talking about. One other thing that I wanted to briefly mention, now this is not related to a reading, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot over the past couple of weeks. I watched a documentary on HBO, which I think was titled Hitchcock and Truffaut. It's about the friendship between Hitchcock and Truffaut, and apparently they became very good friends and talked a lot about film. And one of the things they talked a lot about was suspense and how to create suspense. I just finished reading Hannah Pittard's Listen to Me, which is a novel, but the novel has been described as Hitchcockian. In other words, it's a novel that has a lot of suspense to it. And it's kind of interesting that you're constantly, as you're reading this novel, you're constantly feeling like something really, really bad is about to happen. And nothing terribly bad happens. I mean, there are a few difficulties and a few bad things happen. I won't do a spoiler for you if you want to read the novel. But there's always this sense that something is about to happen. And so I'm going to kind of suggest to you a definition for suspense that works just as well for creative nonfiction as it does for fiction or for movies. I think suspense is when the readers know that they don't know something. So let me say it again. If the readers know that they don't know something, that creates suspense. Because what they want to do is they want to find out what they don't know. That creates a certain kind of tension. And what they will begin to do is reading, and sometimes reading more quickly, to get to the answer. Now, I think that's fundamental to an awful lot of memoirs. One of the things you're going to find is that memoirs, as opposed to autobiographies, have an unfinished feel to them when you start to read them. And even quite often by the time you finish reading them, they still have kind of an unfinished feel to them. Now, autobiography, in contrast, has more of a sense of the story's finished off, we know how it ends, it's complete, even on page one. So that suspense, I think, is often there in a good memoir. And it's quite often there even in a personal essay. So you may want to be thinking about that concept as you're starting to construct your personal essay. Again, if you have any questions, send me an email. And I'm going to set up a discussion board that will deal with the personal essay, where we start talking about the personal essays that are evolving. You can post drafts if you'd like, and we'll try and get you some feedback. Have a good week. I'll talk to you later.